Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi Masechet Shabbat. We are up to Perek Aleph Mishnah Chet. Today's Mishnayot should be Leilu Nishmat, Neria ben Svetlana Aranbayev and Eliyahu ben Burcha Israelov, Menuchatam Began Eden, Amen. Today the Mishnah is going to quote another machloket, another dispute that concerns the prohibition, the Isur of asking a non-Jew to work for a Jew on Shabbat. Bet Shammai Omrim, Bet Shammai say, and notnin orot la'abedan, before Shabbat we may not give hides to a non-Jewish tanner for tanning, velo chelim lechoves ovet kochavim, or clothes to a non-Jewish launderer for washing. The Mefarshim explain, tanning me'abed is one of the 39 melachot, and laundering clothes is forbidden under the melacha of melaben, whitening. The Mishnah says, Ele chedeh sheyasu mibod yom, unless there is enough time for them to be done while it is still daytime. Meaning, if the non-Jew does not have enough time to finish the job before Shabbat, and therefore will do some of it on Shabbat, it appears that the Jew had asked him to work on Shabbat. However, if there is enough time for the non-Jew to complete the work before Shabbat begins, it does not matter if he actually does it on Shabbat. Since he could have finished it before Shabbat, people will not think that he's working on Shabbat at the request of the Jew. Rather, they will assume that it was his own choice to work on Shabbat. Now, although work is being done on the Jew's hides or clothes on Shabbat, that does not violate Beit Shammai's prohibition of having one's vessels work, so to speak, on Shabbat, because that prohibition applies only to work done by the vessel of a Jew and not to work performed upon them. Ubechulan bet Hillel matirin im hashamesh, but in all of them, in all of the cases that we mentioned here, and in all of the previous three Mishnayot, Bet Hillel permit the activities while the sun is still up on Friday, meaning in all of these cases, beginning with the one in Mishnah 5 of soaking the ingredients of ink, Bet Hillel permit a person to do the activity while the sun is still up, even though work will be done by one's vessel or by a non-Jew on Shabbat. And that is the end, Rabotai, of Mishnah Chet. Mishnah Tet now tells of a situation where the view of Beit Shammai was followed. Amar Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel said, Noagin hayu bet Abba. It was the practice in my father's household. Shayu notnin klei lavan lechoves ovet kochavim shlosha yemim kodem laShabbat. That they would give white clothes to a launderer who was an idolater 3 days before Shabbat, so that the laundering could be completed before Shabbat. Now, although the Rav explains, although the halakha follows Bet Hillel's opinion that clothing may be given to a non-Jewish launderer until right before Shabbat begins, Rabban Gamliel's family conducted themselves in accordance with Bet Shammai's dissenting view. Therefore, they did not give their clothing to non-Jewish launderers to be cleaned unless sufficient time remains for the task to be completed before Shabbat. So in the case of white clothes, which are more difficult to clean than colored clothes, 3 days were required. Vishavin elu va'elu. The Mishnah now identifies a case where Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel agree. Vishavin elu va'elu. Both these and those agree, meaning both Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel agree. Shetoanim korot bet abad v'igule agat. Shetoanim korot bet abad v'igule agat. That we may place the beams of the olive press on olives and the discs of the wine press on grapes shortly before Shabbat, even though they will continue to press oil and juice from the fruits on Shabbat itself. And the Mefarshim give us the background in the production of olive oil and wine. After the olives and grapes have been crushed, the resulting pulp is placed in a large vat, and a heavy disc or beam is lowered onto the pulp to press out the remaining liquid. They agree you could do this before Shabbat, even though it's going to continue to press oil and juice from the fruits on Shabbat itself. And the reason is that placing the beams or discs on these fruits is prohibited only midrabanan, under rabbinic law. Now, although Beit Shammai forbid a person to let his utensils operate on Shabbat, that applies only where the task is a melachat deoraita, a biblical melachat, transgression of work, and not in a case like this where it's only a drabanan, a rabbinic transgression. And the Mefarshim explain, if one squeezes juice from olives or grapes on Shabbat, he he is biblically liable for having performed the melacha of mifarek, extracting, which is a tolada of disha, threshing, which was detaching a kernel of grain from its husk. Now, it could have been thought, which is why the Mishnah is telling us this, because it could have been thought that according to Bet Shammai, who forbid having one's utensils, so to speak, do melacha on Shabbat, we would have thought one may not lower the beams on the olive or the discs on the grapes unless there is enough time for the juice to be squeezed out before Shabbat. So the Mishnah is teaching us that this is not so. Rather, Bet Shammai agreed that it is permitted to lower the beams and discs shortly before Shabbat because the pressing of olives consists of two stages. Number one first grinds them in a mill to soften them, and then one places heavy beams on them to extract the oil. Similarly, grapes are trampled before heavy discs are placed on them. After the initial grinding of the olives and the trampling of the grapes, the juice oozes out on its own. The lowering of the beams and discs serves only to remove the juice faster and more efficiently. Therefore, it differs from the biblical melacha of extracting or threshing, and it's prohibited only by rabbinic decree midrabanan. So Bet Shammai agree that a person is not obligated to prevent his utensils from operating if the work is forbidden only midrabanan, only rabbinically. So for this reason, they agree with Bet Hillel and they permit one to place the beams on the olives and the discs on the grapes on Friday, even if the task will not be completed before Shabbat. And that is in Rabotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen v'amen.